Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Maryland Risk Management Education Podcast. My name is Paul Geringer, and I'm the Extension Legal Specialist here in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at the University of Maryland. And today we're going to have a guest on the podcast. The focus is going to be talking about estate planning during the COVID-19 pandemic and trying to get you to think about it and potentially how things may or may not be easier for you if you're considering it during this time. There's one note I need to make during the podcast. I do mention that I cannot remember if Maryland allows for digital signatures on wills. We do not. I should have known that. As long as I have talked about this subject, I should have known that. But that same day, the governor did sign an executive order in the state that does allow for the digital signature of wills and remote signatures. And there has been some stuff put in place since the state has gone on lockdown, and I believe even in Texas too, since Tiffany's from Texas, that does allow for digital notarization and virtual notarization of documents during this pandemic. So with that, I will start the interview that I did with Tiffany Lashmet, who is the extension specialist in ag law at Texas A&M University. Okay, well, back on the podcast today, we have a guest that we have on many times, but I'll have her still introduce herself. Tiffany, how are you today?
For sure. It's good to be back, Paul. Usually we do this at the end of the year as a wrap-up, so it's fun to be here kind of in the middle of the year. My name is Tiffany Lashmet. I'm an extension ag law specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Essentially, I have a very similar job to Paul's, except I cover the great state of Texas.
You cover a state slightly larger than I end up having to cover.
I always use you as my example because you can be across your whole state in 2 hours, and I'm not even out of the panhandle. So yeah.
And now we're all stuck at home more often, so we have more opportunities to do things like this. Normally, it's really hard to schedule stuff with people, which is why I don't do interviews on my podcast.
That's exactly right. All of a sudden, our calendars all opened up.
Yeah, and we've all become proficient in this Zoom technology.
Right.
Yeah. So we thought today we would do a little bit of a discussion on estate planning, since it's probably on a lot of people's minds with the issues going on in the real world today. So, Tiffany, what is an estate plan and why should people be thinking about it right now?
Yeah, for sure. Well, right, an estate plan, I mean, and there are varying degrees of, complexity you can have here, but at the basis, right, an estate plan is just trying to have a plan in place for where you want your assets to go when you pass away. Especially important for agriculture, because not only is it, right, who's going to get the car, who's going to get the house, but in agriculture, it's who's going to get an ongoing business operation as well. And there's a lot of factors that come into play when you're really thinking about that. Estate planning is an extremely important topic at any time, but I think right now, kind of in the midst of the COVID-19 situation, a lot of people are kind of in a panic for, oh man, we need to get a will, we need to get powers of attorney, we need to get some of this paperwork done, that it's really easy to put off until, right, you're kind of in a crisis. I saw an article the other day that talked about the huge uptick in people that are going online and buying the $39.99 will packet from some online seller. And again, it's just, I think people are panicked and thinking we should have had that done. If something happens to me, we need to have that will in place. And that's why we're seeing that occur now.
Yeah, and the problem with right now is to do this correctly and do it properly, you really need to be able to sit down and talk with people. And that's really not it's a lot of Zoom if you want to sit down, or
right.
What are some of the other apps we could be using for this? House party.
Right, yeah, FaceTime, right,
FaceTime.
Sure. Well, and I think too, in a perfect world, right, we all have the family meeting and we sit down and we spend a long time on making this plan, super detailed and exactly what we want. And I think right now for a lot of people, it's just, oh no, we have nothing. We got to get something on paper. And so there's something to be said for that too, right? In a time of kind of crisis, potential emergency, maybe it is worth just getting something, right? To where you're not going to be subject to those state intestacy statutes. And then maybe when things settle down, you can go in and really, hammer out some of the details in the like Shannon Farrell type scenario that we all wish we were in.
You mean the perfect world?
That's
Not
right.
to
Well,
make fun of Shannon.
no, but Shannon's like the guru of this stuff, and he will give you the perfect way to really draft up an estate plan. But it's complicated and it's not quick, and maybe we need to get what we can done now in the situation that we're in, and follow up with that level of detail later.
No, and you bring up a good point. Yeah, it is worth doing right now because we can sit down now, we can get it done. I mean, attorneys are still working in most states. I think in all states, they're an essential business, so they're still technically open.
Right.
But they're working differently now. It may be having a meeting with the attorney like we're doing now, where we're talking via Zoom, or you're talking over the phone, depending on your internet capabilities, because we know rural areas sometimes have really crappy broadband access. So it may be just having a phone call and talking with them, or it may be coming into the office if they're still taking clients in the office by appointment, making sure that, you wash your hands and disinfect stuff before you come in. And it's,
right.
and wear whatever protective stuff we're being told
right.
today we need to wear. And that may work and that may be it. And you can get the quick document done. But with Zoom and these other technologies, maybe what we're seeing is, hey, maybe we could have that family meeting without actually all having to be in the same room together.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, we're really right. We're lucky to be in if we're going to have to be in this crisis, we're lucky to be in it in a time where we do have so much good technology to allow us to keep functioning. And one thing, Paul, that I think is really important, right, is I think you and I both really do recommend people use attorneys to do this stuff, right?
Yes.
The forms that you can get on the internet, like I just can't tell you the number of horror stories with those and how they don't actually, follow the state law they claim to follow, and they can really cause problems. And so I really do recommend working with an attorney to get a will done. And I will say a lot of attorneys now are used to things like Zoom. They're used to things like, having a phone call, drafting a document and sending it to you to review by email. You may have to go in to execute the will. Here in Texas, you can't do an electronic will, so you would have to, like you said, make an appointment and take the certain measures. But maybe that's a one-time trip in there that lasts 2 minutes versus having to go 2 or 3 times for a couple of hours. So I think there's plenty of opportunity for that. And working with an attorney is just so important.
Yeah, working with an attorney is like the most important thing. I mean, in Texas, how many people have asked you, hey, can't you just put a form will up online for me to use? Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, and it's like, no, it's not supposed to be easy, people. It should be a difficult thing to do because it's kind of important that you do this, and one size doesn't fit all.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, because as I keep pointing out, I just did a webinar on this today, and the thing I always point out to people is this is not going to McDonald's and ordering an extra value meal. This is legit going to the best restaurant you've ever gone to in your life, and everything's going to be made to what you order at that exact moment and what's available that day.
Right. Well, and I always say this in my estate planning programs too, like, listen, the way that your attorney is going to help you draft an estate plan is going to be completely dependent on what your goals are.
Yeah.
And if you get online and they have a one-size-fits-all will, well, they don't know what your goals are, right? They don't know if capital gains are going to be a major issue because of when you bought the ranch and who might sell it. They don't know if there's estate tax problems or Medicaid concerns. They don't know that. And so the idea that you can just get online and find one will that works for everything is crazy.
No, yeah, that's exactly right. I think our estate programs are the same because we probably stole our whole outline for how we do them from Shannon.
True, fair, yes.
And 90% of that is not talking about the tools. It's talking about the other factors that go into all of this that they may not want to be considering, which are, basically talking to your family members as human beings for once in their lives. Mm-hmm. And listening to them and thinking about, what do I need to do? And then the rest of it's easy. The tools will magically come together and we can figure that out once we know what everything else is, once we know the human dynamic.
Right.
You're right.
Yeah, there's a lot of thought that has to go into those goals. And, maybe goals that you have, you better know what your kids' goals are, what interests they may have. there's just a lot that goes into that when you're trying to really set up a successful estate plan. Again, especially for agriculture, given the land issues that we have, the family issues, the fact that it's a business operation, there's just a lot of pieces there.
Yeah, and especially right now during this, because if we're looking at, if you're a commercial large grain operation, this may just be a normal blip on the radar for you.
Right.
If you're a small vegetable operation, cut flour operation, dairy, probably lamb operation, this is not a blip in the
That's
radar
right.
for you. This is a huge deal, and this is probably going to change a lot of state plans too, because resources that were there may not exist anymore after this. We don't know. Nobody knows what's going to happen once the economy reopens, whenever that does happen.
Right.
So we may be seeing total estate plans change. So if they're going out to think about an estate plan right now, what tools should we be thinking about including in this estate plan? What are the basics we need to at least consider? I think you've already covered some of them, but
Yeah, so in my mind, there are kind of four basic documents that everybody needs. There may be additional documents for your specific situation, but everybody needs to have a will, a advanced healthcare directive that may be called something different in your state, but we'll talk about what it is, a medical power of attorney, and then a durable power of attorney. To me, those are the four building blocks that you pretty much across the board people are going to need to have in place. And like I say, there may be additional things as well, but if you can start with those, that's going to give you a really good start.
no, yeah, that's a really good start. And
Good.
so I would agree. Those are kind of the basic tools everyone should think about, especially now while we're dealing with, potentials that people are going to be put on, not knowing health conditions of people and how, if they get the illness, how it will impact them, and having to be put on a respirator or a ventilator. This may be helpful to at
Right.
least put family members at ease. And now they at least know, what end of life care decisions you've made for yourself. Because as I always point out, who knows what's best for you in this world?
Right.
Probably you.
Probably you. Right. Well, and another thing, right? I mean, it kind of forces you to have some of those conversations that maybe we don't want to have otherwise, right? Like, I don't really want to talk to you about end of life decisions, but boy, if you're going to expect me to make them for you, I sure need to have a conversation with you about those.
Yeah, because if you're parents, you kind of expect them to tell you exactly what they would like at that point, because they've probably been very vocal over the
Right.
course of their life as to what they like. But this is something a lot of times, like you say, we don't want to talk about it, because who really wants to think about, what happens at this point in our lives?
Right. Well, you and I have a mutual friend who lost a relative last year, and I've heard her tell the story that, they were a real tight knit family, and they had talked about before, what this person would have wanted to happen, but when it came time to actually make the really tough decision to take somebody off of life support, having that document that he had signed that said, "This is what I want," it really gave them some peace of mind that yes, we are making the right decision.
Yeah, that's true. It is really good peace of mind that you know what the person wants, and you know that you're not going against their wishes, and you kind of know exactly what they want.
Right.
It's already a tough enough time. Don't make it tougher on people.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
it's emotional enough. You should kind of think about what that plan should be.
Right.
Um, and that goes into the fun part of all this. And you've kind of mentioned this already. It's kind of comes down to, if you're going to do this, it comes down to, I think, to the execution of it. And that's where it's going to get tricky.
Right. And so I did a little bit of quick research this morning on whether or not certain states allow you to do electronic execution of a will. There are some states, a couple of them, Nevada was one, I think Indiana is another, that actually have passed statutes that allow for electronic will executions. I saw today in a news article, that's what got me thinking about this. Washington, D.C. has got some proposed legislation out there to try and allow it there. In Texas, we don't allow for electronic will execution. So you actually would have to go somewhere and execute that will. In Texas, the requirements, you've got to do it in front of two witnesses who don't, have to review the will or anything, but they have to watch you sign it. And I always recommend those witnesses need not to be interested parties, right? Like they need to be people who you're not leaving stuff to. So in a normal world, I would say we go to the bank and the bank tellers will be the witnesses. But so again, you need to know what the rules are in your state. If electronic execution is an option, awesome. At least in Texas, it's not.
I can't remember. So I didn't even look in Maryland if it's an option. I do not believe it's an option in Maryland, but I'd have to double check, and I will put it in the show notes if I'm wrong
Good, good.
and actually correct myself. But I do know, like, and part of the reason why it's hard to look up right now is the rules are changing in states where they can make the decisions to change it based on the current situation.
Mm-hmm.
They're changing it because, like we were talking about before this started, Maryland's changed. The Secretary of State has changed the rules for notarization, and you can do a digital or a virtual notarization. It's a very it's even more complicated than a normal notarization,
Mm-hmm.
but it's effective to where you can do it. So we can do it. We can pass documents back and forth, and I have to see a file of you signing the document, then see your ID and an example of what your signature looks like, so I can at least remotely verify that's your signature. But then I can at least sign the document, notarize it, and again, record all that. So there's at least a file on this.
Right.
And we have to point out the reason why we go to great lengths to do these is there's one person that really knows what you wanted at this point when you created this document, and they're no longer with us when we actually have to enforce the document.
Well, and that's it. And that, again, I mean, we're not here like on behalf of the lawyer union, but this again is another reason I think it's so important to use an attorney to make sure everything is done right. Because if, some of these things seem real technical and kind of ridiculous that we're worrying about them, but if you get some of these details wrong, then that will may be found invalid if someone challenges it. And then all of the desire that you had and the work that you just put into it is out the window. So making sure that you follow rules like having witnesses or having it notarized, if that's a requirement in your state, you've got to make sure that it's done right. And that's where a lawyer can really help you to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
Yeah. We're not trying to basically promote the legal profession here. It just really is. It's in your best interest.
It's important. Yeah.
Yeah. We've seen too many horror stories between the two of us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
People screwing up and not thinking they did it. And yeah.
Well, another thing, and not only on the execution, but like sometimes you'll write something that makes perfect sense to you, but then when it's in court as an exhibit and you're not there to testify to what you meant by things like, we had a case in Texas not too long ago about the meaning of personal effects, what was included in that and what wasn't. And there was a big lawsuit. And, the last thing you want is your family in some sort of lawsuit fighting over something. Things like that. Again, that's just where a lawyer who does this all the time can really be helpful.
No, that's true. And and they'll at least know the tricks, and they're going to know what's done, and they'll know how to explain better what you want. In our estate planning workshops here, I don't know if I've ever sent you the clip. We use the Parks and Rec clip where Ron Swanson does an estate plan.
Yeah.
And we have to, at the end, I always point out, like, this is not how you execute a will. You would not carry it around to people and have them sign it.
Right.
It is legit locked in a room, and the notary's in there too, and everybody's signing it together.
Right.
But we use it because Ron's basic will, if anybody's seen the show, and I'll post a clip to it in the show notes for those that want to see it, is pretty much something that makes literally no sense to anybody. And you have to figure out how to turn that into something that makes sense for people.
Right.
Yeah. And that will actually stand up in court and, not allow your fortune to be used to build things like parks and, other things that would make Ron mad.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. So anything else on estate planning you want to add in here, Tiffany?
No, like I say, I think, those four basic documents that we gave you, I think is a really good start. Mm-hmm. Make sure you look into the rules for your state on those, because they can differ as far as what you have to do and if you have to have a notary or witnesses or whatever. Just look into those. And like I say, if you're scrambling now, don't think your only option is that internet or the will off the internet, right? There are attorneys who are more than happy to work with you in this situation who are doing a lot of that right now. Make sure if you're going to do it right, I guess is what I would say.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah. They're still open for business. They're still taking clients. They're just doing it. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today, Tiffany. And I will at least put your contact info up so if people have questions for you in the show notes, they can get in touch with you.
Sure. That sounds great, Paul. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy getting to be on your podcast.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Maryland Risk Management Education Podcast. Anything we talked about will be in the show notes. I'll try to get them all in, but if I forget something, just email me and let me know. So if you need to get in touch with me, you can email me at lgoering@umd.edu, or you can tweet me or find me on Instagram at aglawpaul. Send me a message on there. Love to hear for additional content we should be putting up on this site. So thank you again for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.